Our memory verse. Heinz has given us a new one. Let's do it together. 1 Chronicles 29:11. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. 1 Chronicles 29:11. How many of you have had one of those days where you start out to do something, and then you get sidetracked, and then you get sidetracked, and then you get sidetracked more, and when you get done at the end of the day, the very thing that you set out that you knew you had to do above all else didn't get done? Okay, Terry said yesterday she had one of those. You know, sometimes we do that in life as a church as well. And that is, the church can get sidetracked with so many things that they do this and they do that. They'll help feed the poor. They'll help take care of them. They'll do those kinds of things, and they do all of that. They'll be so involved with abortions or the political issues or whatever the thing may be that sidetracks us. You know, a community pregnancy center, whatever, and we get so involved with all those, a Christian school, whatever it may be, that we forget we are above all else the church. And we forget what really is the function of a church, because we get so wound out on that. And I got to thinking, we need to make sure that we always maintain what is the function of the church. And so Jesus, and I hope I didn't put up there, it's 28, it's in the bulletin. I gave you the wrong number, Jerry. I gave you 29. Somebody pointed that out to me. If you're in chapter 29 of Matthew, you have a funky Bible, okay? Because there is none. But it is very simply this. Jesus has told them that he has all authority in verse 18 in heaven and earth, and he says, therefore, this is what I want you to do. He says, go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And so he tells them, go therefore and you do this. Now it's interesting, what it really says in the Greek is not go. That's written in what's called a participle form, and that means the ing word. And it would be literally having gone, meaning as you go throughout your life. And then the command form is this one, make disciples. That's actually where the command form is. You make a disciple. Now, of course, that begs the question, so what is a disciple? For instance, if I were to ask you, what is the difference between a disciple and an apostle, what would you tell me? Okay, are you an apostle? Are you a disciple? Okay, you should be a disciple. A disciple simply is a follower or a learner. All right, and so the illustration is this. In Luke 5:33, they come to ask Jesus a question. They say, we're kind of curious what's going on here with you and your followers, he says. And they said to him, the disciples of John, okay, John the Baptist, they often fast and offer prayers. And the disciples of the Pharisees also do the same. But yours, they eat and drink. He says, okay, now what's going on here? These guys are all these highly structured. But there are these disciples. And a disciple is somebody who chooses to follow somebody else. They get under them. Now, in our society, when we decide to send our kids, we send them to school. And off they go for 6 hours. Whew. You know, and then they come back home and they're back. And then many parents can undo everything that the teacher has taught them. by that afternoon or by that evening. And I remember one time I was over coaching, I think it was second and third, might have been third, yeah, it was second and third basketball, third grade basketball. And this kid came up to me and he said to me, actually I went over, I was talking in the school. They used to have people come in and speak in the school about the importance of reading. And this one kid said to me, I don't have to learn to read. My dad said it's not important. So he managed to undo whatever any teacher could do, you see. And I said, well, so what are you going to be when you grow up? And he said, well, I'm going to be a truck driver like my dad. And I said, well then, how are you going to know what's on your manifest if you can't read? And if you can't read the signs to tell you where to go, I said, you're going to be in trouble when they pull you over and your stuff inside your truck doesn't match what you've got on your manifest. I said, you're in trouble. I said, you're going to have to learn to read. And besides that, this is old. There's a thing called a map. And you're going to have to learn to read the map. That kid today probably is going, oh, that Jerry, I can't believe it, you know, because of, you know, the satellite system, GPS. And I said, you're going to have to. So then later when I was coaching, later in the week, I'm coaching, and he comes running up to me and goes, Jerry, I've figured it out. I am going to become a cook. That way I don't have to know how to. I said, well, how are you going to know what the recipe says? And how much? And you're going to have to order the food, and you're going to have to know how to write that. And he goes, he says, isn't there anything I can be that I don't have to learn to read? I said, no, there really isn't. But you see, what happens is what is taught can be untaught by somebody else. So to be a disciple, we have to be willing to follow. Matter of fact, Jesus is healing this. Comes into the temple. There's a guy who's been born blind. He's there. Can't get in the temple all the way because he is blind. Jesus heals him. And he comes in all excited he's been healed. And the Sadducees and the Pharisees get him and they say, who did that? And he said, I don't know who the guy was, but he healed me. And his name is Jesus. And they said, well, are you sure you were blind? I bet you really weren't blind. He can't do that. And he goes, I really what? They bring in his parents. He said, he's of age. He was born blind. He's of age. Ask him who healed him. And they said, okay, who did that? Who healed you? And at this point, the guy's getting a little irritated. And he says to him, why? Do you want to become his disciple too? Oh. And this is what they respond in John 9:28. They reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. Meaning that Moses is the one that we adhere to. We follow whatever he tells us to do. That's what we do. So the question then is, how do you become a disciple of Jesus? Better than that, how do we make disciples? You know, what we saw in that very beginning, it says, go and make a disciple. So how do we make those? Well, Jesus says in Luke 14:26 this, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoa. What are we talking about here? I love my parents. How in the world can it be that I have to hate my father, my mother? I mean, there are times that you do that, you know, when they just irritate the bejeebers out of you. And you're just going, oh, man. And it says, and my wife, and my children, and my brothers and my sisters. I don't even have any sisters. You know, what's he talking about? The key, though, is found in that word, yes, and even his own life. We have to be willing to hate our own life. What does that mean? That means that if I have a choice between Jesus and my wife, I pick Jesus. If somebody were to put a gun to her head and say, all right, if you do not, Jerry, renounce Jesus Christ, we're going to kill Frankie, your wife, I would have to say, honey, I love you, but I will not renounce Jesus Christ. I will not give up Christ over every other relationship that I have. Jesus must be that important in my life. You know, and I get to looking at that and we say, oh yeah. But how many of us, when relatives come, will stay home? Because that relationship is more important than going and worshiping Christ on a Sunday morning. See, we say that, but will we do it? Do people know the singular most important thing in our lives is Jesus Christ? Or do we give up our relationship with Christ, our chance to worship Him, for something else, for someone else? And you see, it says that we must have Him number one in our life. I think about that and I look back when I was in college, and I remember overhearing somebody say to my German professor, "Isn't Jerry serious about anything?" They would accuse me of not being serious about things. And because you know how serious I am. Just show you how serious I am. Did you hear about the latest guy that went out and shot up a box of Cheerios? You didn't hear about that? Yeah, he's a serial killer. Okay, no? Okay, just... I'm serious about all kinds of things. And my German professor says the only thing I've never heard him joke about is his relationship with Christ. I went, hey, wow, I did one right. That's one in a row. I am really doing good. Okay? And so what happens is it says that we have to have Him as the singular most important relationship that we have anywhere. And it says, compared to everything else, we have to, if you will, hate them, be willing to give that all up. That did come home to me when I became a Christian in Iceland. I came home, I told my mother, I asked her about her relationship with Christ when she became one. She said that occurred to her when she was in her confirmation. She was a Lutheran background. And she said that's when she received Christ. I talked to my older brother about knowing Christ. He said that happened to him when he was a teenager. I talked to my younger brother. He didn't know Christ. I talked to my father. He got extremely angry, and he looked at me, and he said, you go tell that to the hippies. I don't need that crap. You can imagine how well it went over when I said I'm going into the ministry. At that point, my father had 2 sons. I went to a guy, I always had him as my uncle. He was actually my cousin. There's such an age difference. And I went to him and I was talking to him in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was down for a funeral. And I was talking to him and he said, and he was had macular degeneration so bad he couldn't recognize me. And he said, oh, are you the one that does the computers? And I said, you know, I'm Ed's and Alice's son, and that's my parents. And they said, are you the one that does the computers? And he said, and I said, no, that's my older brother. And he goes, oh, then you're the one that drives the school bus. I said, no, that's my younger brother. And he goes, he had 3 boys? And so there has to be that willingness. And by the way, that all resolved over the years. And one of the last things I got to do with my dad and my mother was to pray with them. They were both in the hospital, and to pray with them. And I said, Mom, would you mind if I prayed with you? And my dad said, let's do that. So he had moved that far over all that time. Don't know where he was in his relationship with Christ, but, got to that stage. And it has to be, if the choice comes between you and your parents, you and your spouse, you and whomever, your children, your brothers, your sisters, and we say, yeah, that's pretty obvious. It's really not. I hate to tell you how many times I've watched a wife or a husband wipe out their spouse's walk with Jesus Christ. Meaning that they will be faithful to Christ. They will marry this person, and then very slowly you see them drift away. And the influence in their life has been their spouse, who took them and their walk away from Jesus Christ. And so we have to learn to make disciples. And that disciple, we need to tell them, this is not going to be easy. You're going to have to be willing to give up everything to follow Jesus. Matter of fact, the very next verse, 27, in Luke 14 says, whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me, he cannot be my disciple. Now, what's it mean to carry a cross? I mean, every once in a while you'll see these guys carrying crosses on Highway 50 clear across the United States. Is that what we're talking about? We all get out and do that. Other people say, so how's your relationship with your mother-in-law? That's just the cross I have to carry. It's like that one guy he looked and he said, how are you today? And he says, man, I am very conflicted. He says, why are you conflicted? He says, there's one part of me that's completely joyful, another part of me that's incredibly sad, and I don't know which way to go. He says, well, what's caused the joy? He says, actually, it's the same event that caused both. He said, what was it? He said, I watched my mother-in-law go over the cliff in my new Cadillac. Okay? Well, it's conflicted. Okay, so we go through conflicted times in our lives. What does it mean to carry your cross? What are we talking about? And what the cross was, today, it's that little lapel thing that we wear, or the thing. That was the instrument of death. Today's equivalent would be, well, that's even changing. I was going to say lethal injection, but now you can't have lethal injection because the person might suffer. You know what I really wonder on that? This is a side thing. I hope I won't get too sidetracked. Is how is it can you have assisted suicide by lethal injection and it's not too painful, but if you give it to a criminal, it is? Make up my mind as to which thing I think, okay? What was I preaching on again? Okay, you don't want to lose your train of thought, all right? It says carry your own cross. And so a hangman, the noose, or whatever, it was the instrument of death. And what it's saying is that I have to be willing to put myself and my desires to death. It is exactly the opposite of what is often preached in this country. God wants to just make you the happiest, wealthiest, and his whole job is to come here and to wait on you. And that's not true. It is my job, it says, to pick up my cross and say, this is what I want to do, but I'm following Jesus, and so this is what I'm going to do. And we're faced some of those in big decisions. The reason I am pastor of a church is because of this issue. It is because I chose to follow Jesus Christ. Tomorrow, you're going to be faced with decisions on whether you will do what you want to do or will you do what Jesus wants you to do. There's laying a $100 bill. No one's around. What are you going to do? Pick it up and say, thank you, thank you, thank you. But what happens if you know that it might really belong to somebody else? You see, we have choices in life. And those choices are, will I do what I want to do, or will I do what Jesus wants me to do? Will I follow him, or will I do what I want to do? And so he says that every one of us have to carry our own cross and come after him. Because if we don't, we're not really his disciple. Right? So, our job is to tell people, that what you need is Jesus Christ in your life, and it will cost you everything to choose to follow him. Now, that's not what we want to tell them. We want to say, and God will make you healthy, and God will make you wealthy, but that's not really the gospel. The gospel is, I die to myself to live for Jesus. Okay, so the first thing is, Matthew 28, 19 and 20, is as I'm going, I need to be willing to make disciples. I need to tell people about Jesus. You too want to be a follower of Jesus, but it will cost you. Okay, what about that next thing? And then it says baptizing them. It says you're commanded to do the one, and then you just simply do the next one, which is baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, what does that Greek word baptize mean anyway? You know what the Greek word is? Yeah, it's baptize. Okay, very same word. And it wasn't even necessarily a religious word. You got one ship coming this way. You got one ship coming this way. They're at war. This one fires something at this one, and this ship is baptized. Down it goes. Okay? That's what the word means, simply to put underwater. Matter of fact, it is used several times in there where it's used for washing. And it's the idea that you put something under the water and wash it. You can, when you're doing your dishes, you're baptizing them. Okay? You're putting them underwater. That's what that word means. Baptizo means I baptize. And so that's why we do it. Why do we wait until they're old enough to know what they're doing? It's because, back to what it says here, make a disciple. In other words, they have to choose to become a follower of Jesus first, and then we baptize them. Then we immerse them. Then we put them underwater. If you do it the other way around, it doesn't make any sense because of what baptism demonstrates. In Romans 6:4, it says this, therefore, we have been buried with him through baptism into death, that so as Christ was raised up from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in the newness of life. And so here's the picture. It says that we're buried with him through baptism. We bury him, and then it says, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too might walk in the newness of life. And so we have this great picture of raising up a brand new person to walk for Jesus. Now the word to sprinkle is a different Greek word. It's harantizo, and it's used in the Bible. But that's not ever used in this word to baptize. That won't happen until about 300 and some years later when the first sprinklings begin to take place. Prior to that, all the churches did the immersion thing. Now whether they baptized them straight down or face forward or backwards, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. The picture was that you're buried with him, then you raised to be a brand new person in Jesus Christ. And that's that beautiful picture of what baptism is all about. That I am following Christ. Back in the Bible days, of course, you're going to have to go find some place to do it. They didn't have a baptistry like that. And so they would have to go to some place where there was water, and enough water to put somebody underwater and to bring them up. And so this became a testimony to people that, hey, I'm following Jesus, and I'm going to do this. And so I'm willing to follow Christ in that. I think about in our early stages of our church, before we had our baptistry in that second building that we built, we would often go down to the river, hold picnic grounds, and then we'd just baptize in the river. And there was a guy named Leon in Carson City. And Leon said, oh, Brother Jerry, you got to call me when you're going to have one of those baptisms. And he said, I'll show you how to have a river baptism. The reason he would show us is Leon was black. And so Leon would come out and we'd have the picnic. I'd say, hey, Leon, we're baptizing. And he'd say, Brother Jerry, I'll be there. And so he'd come out and we'd eat, and he'd say, okay, we're going down to the river. He said, but we just don't go down to the river. We go down singing to the river. And Leon would lead us singing, and we'd sing these songs, go down, and he'd pray, and man, everybody wanted to get baptized when Leon got through praying. You know, I mean, it was cool, you know. And so we baptized in the river, and it was just a great time. And finally, I asked him one time, I said, Leon, I got to ask you, why is that river baptism so important to you? And he goes, Jerry, because that's how I got baptized. Back in Illinois, he said, I remember they went out and broke the ice on the creek so that I could get baptized. And I went, whoa. For Leon, when he made that commitment to Christ, we're serious. We're serious, you know. And I went, man, I don't know that I would have done that, you know. But golly, for Leon, it was that important. And I think about that what we're doing is we're getting buried and we're raising a brand new person. And it also gives us an anchor to say, I remember when I did that, to make my commitment to follow Christ. Okay? So, the church's job, the command is make a disciple, and then following up, you'll be baptizing them,